And if we do business the same way that we have done business in our industry, in the solar, the wind, the clean energy industry, for the next 10 years, we will feel the large impacts of climate change much more than I think people realize.
Your trusted source for information on the energy transition. This is the Insider's Guide to Energy podcast. Hello, energy leader. This is Chris Sass, host of the Insider's Guide to Energy, and I asked for just a few moments of your time to make you aware of a brand new program that I think you'll be excited about. The program is called Podcast Power, Media Training for Energy Leaders. You're probably already aware that podcasts are a dominant force in the media today. As an executive in the energy space, you are often asked to be a guest on a podcast, and your legacy media training leaves a lot of gaps in the skills you need to be successful on a podcast. Common sense doesn't always do it. And to avoid these pitfalls, Insider's Guide to Energy has partnered with the Antenna Group and their media trainers to create a hands-on interactive 2-day workshop designed for executives in the energy and clean tech space specifically. You'll get all the skills you need to have successful interviews and to reach the audience you intend to reach. So whether you're reaching out to customers, future employees, or investors, this is the class for you. Space is limited to the first 10, and those that are selected will get the opportunity to be a guest on the Insider's Guide to Energy, practicing your new skills. Welcome to another edition of the Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me is Thomas Byrne, CEO of Clean Capital. Thomas, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Chris. It's awesome to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you here. I guess we probably should start out by talking a little bit about what it is we're going to talk about today and what Clean Capital is and what that means to you.
Sure. Clean Capital is a clean energy investor in the clean energy transition. One of the things that I know we're going to talk about on this podcast is the role of corporates in the growth of clean energy and in the clean energy transition. And I come to all your guests saying that we're not doing enough. We've been working with a bunch of corporates who are leading the way to invest in the clean energy transition, but at the same time, the urgent need is not meeting the moment, and they need to do more. They need to get off the sidelines with all of their corporate profits and do more to invest in the clean energy transition. The urgent need's here, and they need to step up even more than they already have.
All right, so you're throwing the gauntlet down very early in the interview. To the industry out there or the large corporates of what they can do. Let's take a step back and say, what are they doing today? Let's baseline this, and then let's figure out what would be better to do in the future in your recommendation.
Yeah, and my urgent call shouldn't minimize the great work that is being done. I'm simply saying that the needs are more. And if we do business the same way that we have done business in our industry, in the solar, the wind, the clean energy industry, for the next 10 years, we will feel the large impacts of climate change much more than I think people realize. There's a massive increase in corporate demand, in data center demand for power. That is not only increasing overall electricity demand over the next 10 years, that is slowing the decommissioning of fossil fuel plants. So we have to think much more holistically as an industry and as corporate leaders who are active in the industry in how they can do more.
And you say solar and wind from a baseline of, you came from those industries, right? You've worked in those spaces.
Yeah, I've done everything humanly possible in these industries. I started off as a lawyer in the clean energy industry, working in the project finance groups of big law firms. Quickly moved into in-house with the private equity firm, and then ultimately launched Clean Capital with my co-founders in 2016 to be an investor in the clean energy space.
All right. And unpacking what you said before, that the demand increase for power is actually adding to fossil fuels. Is that what you were implying, that since we need so much power that we aren't going to be able to make enough clean energy? Is that the problem statement?
I've seen a wide array of estimates about how much of an increase in demand for power there will be in the next 5-10 years, primarily driven by data centers, the growth of AI, the growth of technology, Also, to some extent, from the electrification and some onboarding of domestic manufacturing, but mostly from data centers. So there was, for the last 20 years, we had relatively flat electricity demand. And now projections, whether you look at the projections from Wood Mackenzie or you look at the projections from the local utility and the ISOs, all of them are saying the same exact thing. Demand is going up. And we're now starting to see, over the last year, more and more folks saying we can't decommission coal plants as fast as we had anticipated. So while there's no new addition of coal plants, there's going to be an addition of natural gas plants to service this demand, and there's going to be a slowing of the decommissioning of coal plants, which has the same effect of keeping more emissions in the atmosphere.
But that also means we are slowing the decommissioning of nuclear plants as well.
Yeah, which obviously from a fossil fuel perspective is a positive thing. People could have a separate argument over whether the safety of nuclear power is sound enough. That's not my expertise, nor will I comment on that. But from a CO2 perspective, nuclear plants are much better than coal plants.
All right. And I know from our previous conversations, I think we talked a bit about electrification, we talked about EVs and data centers, but data centers seem to be prevalent and on the front center of your mind today. Is it that they're that much more, or is it that rapid a growth? Is AI really hitting the world at the pace that we don't understand?
Yeah, I think we are starting to understand it much more than we did even a year ago. We are, as an industry, we as an industry are in the business of power generation. We are not in the industry of forecasting technology changes and software changes and algorithm changes that come out of Silicon Valley. That's a different segment, but we are now catching up as an industry. And a year ago, if you sat down with an investment bank in our line of business or a private equity firm, there might be some discussion on the fringes about data centers and the power generation. I've had those same conversations in the last month, and it is the focal point of the conversations that how are we as an industry, how is the energy industry on a big level, on a small level, how is the clean energy industry going to support that growth? And how are we going to do it in a way that is meeting the moment of climate change? They are very much at odds with each other, and it's a reconciliation that we have to do as an industry, but more broadly socially, to figure out.
So the enterprises that need these data centers, you're saying they should do more.
Yes.
What's more, right? Their core competence is data, right? They're not energy providers. They buy energy. What do you want them to do?
So they are the big corporates who are leading on clean energy and climate, the big tech companies of which you might be using their computer right now, or you might be on their social media later. Those big guys, they are unequivocally leading the charge on buying clean energy for their corporate needs to meet their demands. Now, there's an argument that, well, they're also increasing their demands because they are pursuing AI. So shouldn't they necessarily, because that is going to be directly in the face of climate, shouldn't they be responsible for then supporting that with clean energy? Correct. I believe that is absolutely the case. They have to do a lot. They have to be getting as much of their energy from clean energy to support their increasing demand. But they are simultaneously leaving what I view as a huge opportunity on the table. They are not in the United States, as most of your listeners likely know. We are driven by the tax equity market. A couple of observations about the tax equity market right now. Basel III is going to limit the amount that banks can put into the tax equity market at a moment when we so desperately need volumes more tax equity. So how are we going to meet that moment? It's my view that the billions of dollars of profits from Apple, Microsoft, Meta, go right down the list of your big corporates and your smaller corporates, by the way, as well. Those are the folks who have the capability to fund the entire tax equity needs of our industry over the next decade. And they have to figure out a way to unlock that capital and do so.
And I guess you're saying you want them to do more. You're saying they have to do more. Are their shareholders willing to let them do more? I mean, they're trying to return shareholder equity, right? Shareholders want
But it's a good
value.
investment. Tax equity is an awesome investment. Investing. So they, what I hear from big corporates are they want to be leading the charge on clean energy and they want to make shareholder returns. And nothing I'm saying is inconsistent with that. The returns on tax equity for the banks who have been in the industry for the last 10 years are massive. There's a massive tax savings. There's a massive IRR boost that they get from investing in tax equity, and that could be the same for all of the big corporates out there.
All right. Now, we're saying we want them to do this. You're saying you're in conversations with them. Where is this in the reality of becoming a reality?
It's in conversation mode. Chris is the honest answer. I published a small article or opinion piece a number of months ago, 8 months ago. I continue to beat the drum whenever I'm given the opportunity to beat the drum, and I wish I could tell you that we've moved heaven and earth, and that Apple has the coffers open and they're funding the tax equity space. That's not happening, and it needs to. I don't know what I get that tax equity is an inherently challenging financial instrument to understand, and CFOs and treasurers and controllers at some of these corporations might not want to give it the time it needs, but it's an important thing for them to pursue. I don't know where we're going to get. The U.S. is leading the charge in clean energy right now. The key financial instrument to unlocking the potential of clean energy in this country is tax equity. It's written in by the IRA, and I fear, do not have a sufficient answer into how tax equity is going to be supportive of this industry over the next 10 years, especially as banks will be tightening their tax equity exposure.
Right. What is the solution, I guess? So you're giving me the problem. You're saying you want people to be more involved. So the solution is the big players you mentioned, they step in and fill the gap, is what you're telling me. They're going to take over for the banks, is what you'd like to see.
I think I don't want them to take over the banks. I want the banks to continue to do their part, what they've done. But there are limitations, and as I said at the outset, Basel III makes those limitations even greater. So we need to replace it. We need to replace that capital, and then add to it, and add to it in large volumes. That is the problem. The solution is going to ultimately be in the balance sheet of many non-traditional tax equity investors. We at Clean Capital have our tax equity partners. We do have a corporate is one of our favorite tax equity partners right now. They do tons of deals with us every single year. So they have taken the time to figure out the space, figure out how to invest, how to get great returns, and we are now on I think our third year of investing and partnering with them in the tax equity market. It's worked for them, but they're a relatively small group, small corporate relative to the big guys that I'm talking about. So it's definitely, and there's other new corporates who have come into the space, and some are coming in because of transferability, but it's still not meeting the moment. It's still not at the volumes and the sums that we're going to need. So yes, Chris, that is the problem. And if I had a magic wand, I would just be able to tell every corporate, every CFO at the big tech companies to get off the sidelines. But I have found that it's very, very challenging to even engage in the conversation.
So where does Clean Capital play into that specifically? What do you specifically do to help with this, other than evangelize and helping me right now?
Yeah, evangelizing is part of it, and we'll continue to evangelize to anyone who will listen or anyone who will give us the platform. But the place that we have is that we do deals on a daily, monthly basis that always need tax equity, and when we are going out to the tax equity market, we are including some new players. Whether we're doing it internally or whether we hire an advisor to help us with the tax equity, we are trying to include new players in that market who have either expressed some interest or we want to get off the sidelines. That's not been successful yet, though. We still have the same old players doing our tax equity deals because we have to get our deals done. So getting them over the finish, getting new players over the finish line is a long process and a tall order. But we have seen new players. Our primary tax equity partner over the last 2 years, as I said, is a corporate who was very new to the space in 21, 22, and now they're very active, not just with us, but with many of our peers in the industry. So that is a very good example of how you can do it, and how a corporate can be led to the promised land, so to speak.
Got it. Makes sense to me. I guess I'm also looking, if I look through, things that we've talked before, I get that point. If I look at the overall impact of the costs and the economy and where we are today and the current market conditions where we are. So I get the regulation. You highlighted changes in regulation. How is that weighing into where we're at?
So costs are unpredictable in our business at best. And when you break down the costs that it takes to build, we primarily do solar with increasingly a good amount of storage. When you break down the costs of building these projects and to some extent operating them as well, you have to look at each line item. And let's take panels. Panels have gone up. So historically, for the first 10 years of my career, they just kind of went in one direction, generally speaking. They went down. And then somewhere around 4 or 5 years ago, they started going up again. And panels, there was a moment
The
in
cost
time
of a
where
panel or per kilowatt? Like what metric of cost?
literally the cost of a panel on a per watt basis.
And per watt. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. They came down. They were, when I started in this business, they were $6 a watt or $5.50 a watt,
Yeah.
and now I think you could buy panels in the range of less than 30 cents a watt. So it's been a massive change in 15 years. But those generally came down until 5 years ago. They started trending up, and now you've seen them come back down quite a bit. All right, so that's one line item that you have to try to solve for as a developer and owner of solar projects. But then you look at interest rates. So the last 2 years, panels have come down, but interest rate costs have gone up. We all see the monthly announcement from Chairman Powell. Rates have not been coming down as fast as people had hoped at the beginning of the year. It seems like they're going to continue to just slowly evaluate, maybe make a move or two this year. So the interest rates have gone up. And then you just go right down the line items of each cost, each input to a solar or storage project. And there's this continuing oscillation of costs to build a project. And you are trying to develop a project. If we're getting land today in 2024, that's to build a project in 2026, 27, 28. And we're trying to figure out if it's economical or what the economics of those projects are 3 years prior to it even having a chance to hit the ground. So costs are always a challenge. It's not necessarily that costs are always going up, though costs have gone up on some fronts in the last number of years. It's trying to forecast where they're going to be 3 or 4 years from now, coupled with where the energy markets are going to be.
So having unpredictable costs, how does your development strategy change, or what do you do for a development strategy? Because you want as much clean energy as you can, but it's got to make economic sense.
Yeah.
You talked about some constraints or law changes, coming in on the tax benefit, which benefit you. What's your development strategy look like then?
The development strategy is for us at least, is spread yourself wide, knowing that make a number of bets, knowing that some of your bets are not going to pan out. Try to minimize your losses on those bets, and hopefully lean into the successful ones. And the successful ones, the whole thesis on development is that the successful ones far outweigh the losses, and you try to keep that ratio of success to loss on the healthy side of probability.
And then the IRA also had this domestic content part, and there's fear of more tariffs going on. We had our Secretary of State talking or going to China and talking about development of renewables. How does that impact all this? I mean, you already talked about costs going up. How do you deal with these kind of things that are unknown?
In my view, the domestic content adder is was a great feature of the IRA. It will and has resulted in a meaningful investment in domestic manufacturing. There's a whole lot of nuances to that, and whether what actually has to be manufactured in the United States versus what actually can be cobbled together and put together in the United States. I'm not, that's for someone else to get into the fine pieces of that. But at a high level, it's driving some manufacturing of panels, in particular here in the United States. I'm skeptical that that's going to be at a volume that is going to overtake the foreign imports.
But whether the panel is made in the United States or import, at the end of the day, it's a straight business decision for you, right? So if the tax benefit for buying a domestic panels there, you'll do it. If it's cheaper to buy a foreign one and pay the penalty, you'll do that, will you not?
Yes, I mean,
So,
it's that simple. It's um, the challenge on procurement is forecasting our pipeline over the next 12 to 24 months, entering into procurement contracts for projects we know will happen, and then probably projects that we think are likely to happen, but some may fall off. So there's a forecasting component for us, and that's simply, to your point, Chris. That's economics. Like if domestic panels with the ITC adder improve the returns of an investor like us, of an owner like us, we're going to do that. If it's getting them from foreign non-tariff countries, we're going to do that. The challenge for us is actually much more on forecasting our needs over a long period of time.
and the needs based on the fact there's demand is just the economics, or I guess help me understand why that's the challenge. Because it sounds like it's a market that's a hyper growth market. There's demand there.
Yep. Yeah.
So
We're always going to be building projects. Are we going to build? Is Clean Capital going to build 100 megawatts of solar projects and storage projects in the next 12 months, or are we going to build 60 megawatts? And the second year, are we going to build 200, which we hope to do, or will it end up being 140? That interplays also with the development risks that we talked about moments ago, which is how many of those pipeline projects are actually going to turn out to be successful. And that's part of the challenges of development is you're at once trying to handicap how what your needs are going to be over the next 2 to 3 years, but you're doing that against some uncertainty, which is which projects in the development pipeline are economical, are viable 2 to 3 years from now. Are the PPA rates supporting the costs that we discussed earlier? Like, are the costs going to be in line with what we in 2 to 3 years what we think they are now? That's that's like the puzzle that you're like trying to constantly put together as someone who develops to own, right? We ultimately own all of our projects. We don't sell them for the most part. So that's a puzzle that we're constantly trying to manipulate.
and what about land? Is land weighing into this, or is that a rounding error compared to the noise of what we just talked about?
I'd say it's closer to a rounding error. Honestly, we identify states or geographies, areas that where we think are going to be, for a wide variety of reasons, attractive to build solar projects. Either there's a policy that we're hearing rumors of and we're tracking, or there's an increasing demand from corporate off takers. If either of those things occur, or multiple other things, will make some strategic bets on land. The near term cost of land is typically a lease option, which we pay to the landowner. That payment is not significant relative to our overall capital under management, our balance sheet. It does become a meaningful rent if you build that project. It's not inconsequential by any stretch, but by that time, you have a viable project that makes economic sense and supports the rent payments that you've promised to the landowner.
So based on kind of this unpredictability, What does that mean for commercial energy prices? So if you're a large corporation that uses quite a bit of energy, or data center, or you have process that needs a lot of energy, that must mean it's not predictable for them as well.
The cost of energy, historically, this business has benefited from the unpredictability of cost. We have a number of solar projects that were built 10 years ago, and we have off takers who entered into a fixed PPA with us, either behind the meter or virtual PPA in a state like Massachusetts. And the more fixed they were able to get their cost of energy, the better, because it eliminates an unknown. And I think that still holds true. And a lot of the corporate off takers that we're talking about continue to like the idea of having predictability of power pricing.
Are we getting to the point though where, I mean, the PPA as we know it is evolved, right? You talked about virtual PPAs. How do these get financed going forward? Do you think is it going to be the same that we've seen, or historically you've been doing things one way? Is that where we're going over the next couple of years? The same kind of funding route?
Financers, meaning lenders, debt providers, are keeping up with the market, and they're adjusting how they look at the market. The biggest segment boom probably in the last 5 years in solar has been community solar. That when we first were looking at community solar in 17, 18, I don't think lenders were interested in looking at it at that point. The idea of having a whole bunch of cats and dogs residential customers who are accounting for all of the power from a solar project with variability in the price because it's just a discount to the retail rate, that was not attractive to lenders. But now you're seeing all lenders in our segment in the community solar business in one way or another. Some are more conservative, some are more aggressive and more constructive because they know the business. But I don't know of a lender that we've worked with, and we have probably 10 or 15 or more lenders in our world, that is averse to community solar. And I think the same will be the case going forward as offtake models evolve, as they feel a little bit more merchant-y. Lenders will find a way to continue to lend into the business.
How universal is this, let's say, across the North American footprint? Is it state by state, or is the problem that we talk about exacerbated in states like California or Texas or somewhere? Are there areas where this is worse than other parts of the U.S.?
The lender capital, the
Yeah,
financeability.
yeah, just going through. You want to put a project in. You're saying that there's not necessarily going to be the demand there. You're not going to have the tax advantages. Where are we going to see this problem first and worse? Where's the data center problem greater?
The data center problem. Taking two different questions. One, the first is will how lenders look in particular states, and lenders, like right now, there's not a lot of lenders financing ERCOT batteries. Those are there are lenders, just not a lot of them, and those come with more structured products. They have some downside protection. They have features that make those lenders who are involved feel safe with their loan. So the more merchant like that the revenues are on a solar or storage project, the fewer lenders that you will probably have at your disposal. The more contracted it is, the more lenders you will have at your disposal because it's very bankable. But lenders are we are seeing lenders who are engaged in more merchant-like revenues, and they're constructive there. That will be state to state, and where there's, and you see it mostly in either where PPAs are either short term or where there's batteries in the battery market. That's very much front and center. Is just how financeable the revenue streams are, the revenues of the project are. The second point of the data centers is actually a really interesting question, because the embedded in that question is, where do you build energy projects to support data centers? And everyone's heard about, like, Virginia is like a boon for data centers. We've heard that for the last few years. But the reality is data centers are now cropping up all throughout PJM, in Texas, in many different markets. And those who are building the data centers want energy projects that it's very difficult to get them on site, but they want them nearby. The leaders in the corporate offtake world are being very scrutinous on where these solar wind storage projects are being sited, because their goal is to be able to say that they're net zero, that they built a data center here that uses X amount of kilowatt hours on a daily basis, but they are getting locally nearby a clean energy. They're getting clean energy from someplace very close by that is ultimately making their emissions net zero. That's the for many of these corporate leaders, that is what they're trying to achieve.
And so I understand from your business model, you work closely with these big corporates in partnership type models with them. So when you're working with them, are you helping them cite that, or are they helping you cite where they want the
That's
location?
you're asking a question that's real time for my company. We are on a very, getting into the corporate offtake space has been in the works for us for the last 15 months, call it, give or take. And we've been engaged with a number of corporates in during that period of time, and we've the more we've learned, the more we've leaned in. And what you're seeing is there is that chicken and an egg that you still have, that you're articulating, which is, do the corporates tell you where they want you to be, or do you tell the corporates where you're going to be and hope that they're there? And that collaboration needs to be stronger on a go forward basis, because this is going to be a source of massive growth for the energy sector broadly, clean energy, hopefully mostly, and the collaboration between those of us who provide energy, clean energy, and those who use energy, meaning mostly the data center owners. That collaboration has to be strengthened going forward, and it is. There's a lot of evidence that we've experienced in only a short year that has brought us closer together with the corporate offtake community and has a much better sense of what their objectives are.
So how do they go about? I mean, I get the partnership, right? So you sit and you talk through it. How do they go about bidding that out fairly? So they bring multiple developers in. Do they pick their favorite and shortlist them ahead of time, or like, because once you're given the site and you're going there, you're kind of taking it out of a fair free market. So is it
Yeah. So
how does that work?
I've seen it from both angles. I've seen corporates who issue an RFP and they just blanket, 100 developers and say, do you have any clean energy in this location that we can buy? And it's a typical RFP. People will submit to the RFP and they're going to shortlist 5, and then they pick one. That's from the corporate user's
That's more
perspective.
reactive, right? That's assuming you've already built and have capacity,
Yes.
but that's not
Yes.
generally going to grow the
Yes.
capacity at the rate you may need the capacity.
Correct. And then the flip side is, we will build a project, and we've done this at Clean Capital, and then we similarly RFP out to the corporates. And we say, we are building a solar project. Do you want to buy the power, and what price of power do you want to pay for that? Neither of those, both of those are reactive, to your point. And neither of them are strategic and collaborative. That's the missing link right now. It's getting better though. It's like I give all your listeners confidence that there is an increasing collaboration, but it's still not. There's still a lot of work to be done on it.
Well, I think we've gone round and round, but I guess to bring this back together, we started out saying, hey, we want to see more activity. I think you shined a little bit of light saying we're getting there. What's the call to action that we want to end this episode with?
The call to action is two important things. One, to this last point, we focused a lot on corporates and what corporates can be doing. And the reason for that is I think a lot of them are leaders in this industry. A lot of them care about this. It affects their bottom line, and they are commercially focused. And that commercial focus is really important because they can negotiate deals to get things done and get things done quicker. I've seen that. So there's a lot of great that they're doing to advance clean energy. What I'm saying is that the next 5 years of growth in power demand requires and necessitates corporates, developers, all constituents in the industry to be working together to satisfy the needs both of the offtake, but then to the earlier point, the capital needs of our industry. It's a great opportunity for corporates to be leaders, and now's the time. They've shown their proclivity to lead, and now is the time to lean in even more and do more.
So, Thomas, I look at the IRA, I look at the adders, I look at domestic content, and one of the things that appears to me is we may not get economics to make our panels always cheaper or get enough of them, which means you might be in a position where you have to buy overseas panels or imported panels. What's your take on that?
Yeah, and that's the exact position that all of my peers are in right now, is that you are looking at a new landscape in the clean energy market where domestic content and domestic manufacturing is finally returning to the United States, and that's a great thing. But at the same time, most of the panels for the foreseeable future are going to continue to come from foreign panel manufacturers. And Clean Capital, when we assess, when we're looking at particular projects, we're going to absolutely value the domestic content component of the potential domestic content component of a panel, but we're also going to be looking at foreign panels like any other developer is going to be doing to ensure that the economics measure up.
Do you have projects where it is so important to your who you're doing the development for that they want to have U.S. content only and only stuff manufactured onshore, that they're willing to pay a premium, that they're willing to do that into a deal?
We have not seen that yet. We have seen preference for projects that serve a broader mission than just clean energy, like for instance, if they're being built on a landfill, built on a brownfield, built in a community that's underserved. Those stories resonate much more with some of the partners that we work with than does the domestic content feature of a project potentially.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on this episode of Insider's Guide and sharing with the audience today. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a blast.
And for our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you have, don't forget to subscribe and like and ask questions in the comments. Send us comments, and we'll see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy. Bye for now.